13. Got my notes right here. John chapter 13. And we have a live studio audience. Dozens and dozens and dozens of human beings. All right, we're going to be at John chapter 13. We're going to start in verse 21. We're talking about the danger of occupational thinking. Now, when I read this, I loved it so much because this is a passage that's going to really help wives understand their husbands, because we're all buffoons, okay? And we get a chance to see Jesus's disciples even like showing us ultimate buffoonery, okay? And it's just the coolest thing. But going back to occupational thinking may make you money, but relational thinking gives you meaning, okay? And men, we're often experts at the occupational thinking, but sometimes not so smart in the relational thinking. And this passage right here is the backstory where Jesus is with the disciples. He's at the Last Supper. Now, the disciples don't know it's the Last Supper, but he's given them this forewarning. And then he tells them, hey, this is going to be the last time we meet until I enter my kingdom. And so for a lot of them, they're like, oh, this is great. You know, your kingdom's coming. You're going to be on the throne by this time tomorrow, and we're going to be feasting together. They didn't realize it was a spiritual kingdom. And so Jesus is giving them this heads up. And then he says this. This is the backstory. And he says this in verse 21 of John chapter 13. So if you got your Bible, turn there. John chapter 13, verse 20.
Am I reading that?
David, you read 21 through 25.
Okay. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit and testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you that one of you will betray me. The disciples began looking at one another, at a loss to know of which one he was speaking. There was reclining on Jesus' bosom the disciples, one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, tell us who it is of whom he is speaking. He, leaning back thus on Jesus' bosom, said to him, Lord, who is it? Keep going.
No, stop right there. And is that the NAS?
New American
You
Standard.
should be reading my NIV.
It's a little choppy, but
a little bit choppy there. But
okay, I'll read it all.
So the story basically is Jesus is saying, look, we're gonna the next time we eat this, we're gonna be together in my, I'm gonna be in my kingdom. And then he says, one of you is gonna betray me. And all the disciples are like, what? Like, who's going to betray you? And so Peter looks at John, who John was the closest to Jesus at that moment. And Peter's like, ask him. And so John's like, who's it going to be? And then Jesus says, he's like, okay, who it's going to be? It's going to be the one with whom I dip into the dish. Okay, this is where we are in verse 26. David, read verse 26, 27.
Okay, Jesus answered, it is the one whom I will give the piece of bread and have dipped in the dish. Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him.
So Jesus said to him, what you are about to do quickly. Okay, so get the story real quick, because you gotta follow me here. Jesus is saying somebody's going to betray me. And then Simon Peter says to John, ask Jesus who it is. John says, Jesus, who is it? And then Jesus says very plainly, it's the person who I'm going to dip into the dish and then give him the bread. He dips it in the dish. He gives it to Judas. And then Jesus looks at Judas and says, whatever you're going to do it quickly. Now, just stop right there. Could it be more obvious? The answer to John's question, who is it going to be? And Jesus says it and lays it out there very plainly. This is who it's going to be. Are you confused about who it would be? I mean, it's Judas, right? He said, it's going to be the guy that I dip the bread and give it to. He dips the bread, gives it to Judas, and then says, whatever you're going to do it quickly. And all the disciples, look at how they respond in verse 29.
All right. Since Judas had charge of
verse
the money.
28 and 28.
So Jesus told him, what you're about to do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival or to give something to the poor.
Now stop right there. Like I said earlier, it couldn't have been more clear. But then in verse 28 it says, but none of the disciples understood why Jesus said this to Judas. And what they thought was that because Judas was in charge of the money, that Jesus was telling him to go buy what was needed for the festival. Instantly, their male brains went to occupational thinking. Their male brain said, Judas's job is this, and therefore Jesus said that in light of what Judas does for work, right? This is what Judas does for a living. And so my brain is still filtering through the occupational thinking. And so they didn't get what Jesus was trying to tell them. Jesus was in the moment of trying to elevate them from occupational thinking to relational thinking. They didn't get it. Look, here's the differences. I wrote down some differences between occupational thinking and relational thinking. Because again, occupational thinking will make you money, but relational thinking gives you meaning. Occupational thinking is concrete, logical, and involves fixing things. Relational thinking is dynamic, emotional, and involves feeling things. Occupational thinking is single-channeled. Relational thinking is multi-channeled. Occupational thinking will make you money. Relational thinking gives you meaning. When a dude comes home from work, he's been stuck in occupational thinking, and that's what makes him successful at what he does. It's concrete, it's logical, it involves fixing things. Somebody has a problem, and he's fixing that problem, and he feels good about it. But when he comes home, he's got to learn to shift into the relational thinking. See, the disciples didn't get it. They didn't get it until later on, and we'll talk about that right at the end. But now the question is, how do you make the switch? So how do we make the switch from occupational to relational? This is extremely important. So I'll just say this. In our app, if you go to our app, Bentham Brothers, and download our app, you'll see we have a section on there called Relationship Studies. And in there, we probably have about 75 specific studies of principles in the scripture that will help you in your relationships. But I only want to mention 2 things to the guys and 2 things to the girls. So 2 things to the husbands and 2 things to the wives that will help the man, specifically for the man, because we're talking about the disciples and their buffoonery, who were experts at work, but not so much in experts in relationships. 2 things for the guys. Number 1, here's what you're going to do. Number 1, you're going to be fully present. When you come home, you've got to be fully present there in the home, which is going to mean that you got to take your phone and turn it over and not look at it. Now, if you own your own business, I would say this. Before you go to bed, turn your phone back over. Work it out with your wife where you could take a good 30 minutes and handle your business. Okay, but if you don't own your own business, you're an employee, bam, turn it over and don't open it back up until the next day. So it's the number 1 is being fully present. There's a lady, her name was Marina Abramovic. She was an artist, and she did this little experiment called The Artist is Present at the Museum of Modern Art in Chicago. And for 3 months, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, she would sit on a chair and have a chair right in front of her. And anybody that was in the museum could come and sit on that chair, and she would give them, it was about 5 or 6 minutes of her time, no words spoken. All that was required was that the two people would look into each other's eyes. And so the person would come and sit, and I saw this video on YouTube. You should look it up. It's crazy. The person would come and sit, and then she would have her head down like this, and then she would look up. And when she would look up, she would stare right into their eyes and just look at them. And I'm telling you, after about 30 or 45 seconds, you saw people start to break down and like weep and cry, because in that moment, they knew the most important person in her life was that person sitting right in front of them. She was fully present. You saw grown men like sobbing, their shoulders bouncing up and down, because they've never experienced the power of full presence. Like, we need that as guys. You need that. Are you listening to me?
No, I absolutely did. It's funny because yesterday I was brushing my teeth last night, and my 10-year-old boy comes rolling in. We've been spending some time at the lake, and he was just in and out all day long with his buddies. And I'm brushing my teeth, and he comes in, he grabs his toothbrush, and I said, "Chase, I haven't seen you all day." And he goes, "Yes, you have. You've seen me all day." And I said, "No, but I haven't seen you." And he stops and goes, "Dad, that doesn't make any sense."
Yeah.
And I said, No. I said, "Look me in the eyes." And so he looked me in the eyes, and I said, "Okay, there we go." And then he just left. So anyway.
So number 1.
There. I wanted presence.
Number 1, be fully present. Okay, number 2, listen beyond the words. So number 1 is be fully present. Number 2 is listen beyond the words. Look, we guys, when we're trapped in occupational thinking, we're thinking in terms of facts and not feelings. Remember, facts are the logical things. Facts involve fixing things. But feelings involve approval. It's like your kids' bids for approval. It's like, "Daddy, I just colored this picture for you. Look at it." Okay, now, if you're occupational thinking, you'll think, "Okay, now, honey, whenever you're coloring, you got to stay inside the lines. And when you stay inside the lines, it'll look a lot. See, that's occupational thinking. But we don't do that with our kids. What do? We're like, oh, that was so good. Because in that moment, what do they need? They don't need my fixing. They need my approval, right? So the first is be present. The second is listen beyond the words.
Can I say one thing on that? Now, as you mature past that, because now we have politicians that instead of standing on concrete policy that makes sense and is good for the country, they look at where the polls are. So they're seeking for approval more than they are standing on principles and policy, which is nonsense. That's immaturity.
Now, that's two things for the, hold on real quick. Hold on. There's two things for the husbands. Now there's two things for the wives. This was fun to actually just write out. And it's just two very simple things. One is preparation. The two is patience. The first is preparation. Look, your husbands are experts at relationship. They just don't know it, and you don't know it yet. You have to prepare them. Like, you are the person that God has given to so that you can train them in relationships. Look, my wife has spent the last 22 years training me, like preparing me for a relationship. I say something to my daughter and she's like, oh, okay, huh, you can't say that. Like, I'm like, why? And then she's explaining, just like, my wife's Italian. So she's like cooking a meal. You can take raw vegetables and raw food and just dump it on a plate, right? That's how we guys come packaged. Like, we got all the raw materials, but you got to prepare it. So first, wives, look at your husbands and think, okay, I need to prepare him, which leads you into patience. Think of your husband in the same way that you think of your son. Like, I heard my wife and I actually heard my son, who's 18, talking with his girlfriend the other day. He's on the phone, and I forget what it was that she was saying. And he was like, no, Bailey, you understand, you're not listening to me. And instantly I'm like, it's probably you're not listening to her. And so I had an opportunity to talk with him like, dude, like, you can't handle it like that. But yet in our heart of hearts, we're like, I hope Bailey's going easy on him because he is an idiot. Like, he's an 18-year-old boy, And so the same way with wives, it's like patience. It's while you're preparing that meal, be patient with it. You don't rush through whenever you're cooking a meal or whatever. You take your time with it. So it's preparation, it's patience. So the key is to help us move from occupational to relational thinking. And when you do that, not only men will you make money, but you'll also have meaning. All right,
Uncle Ray, did you want to say something?
I did. I'm not sure where I got it from, but this works both in the workplace and at home. I learned that the best thing, I think I've shared it in here before, is focus on that person's right eye. Just
focus on the person's right eye.
Yeah, and that lets them know. But it's not just for. I learned that with dealing with people at work.